There are names that history decides to preserve, and names it quietly allows to disappear. Marie Laveau is one of those names that seems to exist in two separate realities, celebrated in folklore, whispered in legend, yet carefully erased from formal textbooks. But the woman who carried that name in the cotton lands of Mississippi was not the theatrical voodoo queen later mythologized in New Orleans. She was something far more threatening to the social order of her time. She was a woman who understood that information, patiently collected and precisely applied, could undermine power more effectively than open defiance ever could. What you are about to hear is not the softened version repeated in classrooms, nor the mystical fantasy package for tourists strolling down Bourbon Street. This is a story that never made it into official histories because it exposed an unsettling reality. The enslaved were not merely passive sufferers awaiting rescue, but active strategists shaping their own paths to freedom using methods far more subtle than revolt. And Marie Laveau, an enslaved woman in Mississippi whose true life was intentionally obscured, wielded those methods with a calculated precision that would permanently alter dozens of lives. The Natchez District of Mississippi in 1839 was a region where wealth was counted in acres and human bodies. The Mississippi River sliced the landscape like a living artery, sending cotton south toward New Orleans while funneling money and influence back upriver to the plantation elite who controlled vast stretches of fertile bottomland. The Beaumont plantation spread across nearly 3,000 acres of that rich soil, and at its heart stood a grand white column house that embodied everything the South wanted to believe about itself. Elegant, orderly, rooted in what they proudly called tradition, though that tradition was, in truth, the organized exploitation of 247 enslaved people who had no choice but to sustain that illusion of refinement. The plantation functioned as a self-contained dominion, complete with its own internal economy, rigid hierarchy, and carefully enforced systems of reward and punishment. At the top sat the Beaumont family. Charles Beaumont, the aging patriarch, had inherited the land from his father. His wife, Eleonora, ruled the household with severity hidden beneath polished manners and silk gowns. Their eldest son, Thomas, was studying law in Vicksburg, already envisioning a future in politics. Two daughters were being prepared for strategic marriages, while the youngest son, still in his teens, was being groomed to one day inherit the plantation itself. Beneath the family were the overseers and managers, men like Cyrus Holt, whose responsibility was to extract maximum labor from the enslaved population while keeping resistance firmly suppressed. Holt was in his 40s, lean and sun-weathered, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His cruelty was deliberate rather than impulsive, governed by calculation. He knew injured property lost value, so his punishments were designed to cause pain without permanently reducing a person's ability to work. Below the overseers existed the enslaved community, divided into layers that mirrored the plantation's needs. House servants labored inside the main residence. Field hands worked the cotton from planting through harvest. Skilled laborers, blacksmiths, carpenters, coopers maintained the infrastructure. Others held specialized roles, including midwives and healers, whose knowledge was quietly relied upon even as it was officially dismissed. Into this tightly controlled world came Marie Laveau on a Tuesday in March of 1839, purchased at auction in Natchez for $850. The sale had taken place at the Forks of the Road, the second largest slave market in the South, where men, women, and children were displayed on raised platforms and inspected like livestock. Marie stood on that platform with her gaze lowered, her posture carefully composed to suggest obedience, while buyers examined her teeth, her hands, her body. The bill of sale listed her as healthy, literate, knowledgeable in household administration and herb cultivation, approximately 23 years old, with no known defects or vices. That single word, literate, should have raised immediate suspicion. Teaching enslaved people to read was illegal in Mississippi, punishable by brutal whipping for the enslaved person and heavy fines for anyone who instructed them. But Beaumont's purchasing agent, a man named Dalton who specialized in such transactions, saw only practicality. A literate enslaved woman who could track medicinal inventories and read supply receipts was simply more valuable than one who could not. What the bill of sale omitted was how Marie had learned to read, or why her previous owner, a Louisiana planter named Rousseau, had been so eager to part with someone so clearly useful. No references were offered. No detailed history accompanied the sale. There was no explanation for why a skilled, healthy enslaved woman would be sold at all. Dalton had asked, of course, but Rousseau's agent had provided only vague responses. Claims of downsizing, shifting investments, the usual justifications that were often true enough to end further questions. The reality, which Dalton never learned, and which Marie never volunteered, was far more unsettling. Rousseau had sold her because he had begun to fear her, not because she had rebelled openly, not because she had been violent or defiant, but because events seemed to occur around her. Accusations against enslaved people mysteriously collapsed. Punishments were avoided through chains of coincidence that happened far too often to be accidental. Information meant to remain secret somehow reached those who could use it to protect themselves. Rousseau could never prove Marie was responsible, but superstition took root all the same. Uneasy and unnerved, he sold her at a financial loss simply to remove her from his land, deliberately keeping her history indistinct to ensure the sale proceeded without scrutiny. Marie arrived at Beaumont Plantation in the back of a wagon, her few belongings tied into a cloth bundle. She was assigned to the row of cabins behind the main house, a line of crude wooden structures reserved for domestic workers. Each cabin housed 4 to 6 people, offering little privacy and even less comfort. Marie's cabin was marginally better than the field quarters. It had a wooden plank floor instead of packed earth, and a small window fitted with shutters. Still, it was far from anything that could be considered humane. She shared the space with 3 other women. Dinah, in her 40s, oversaw the main house laundry and had lived on the Beaumont property her entire life. She knew the plantation's rhythms, secrets, and power structures intimately. Rachel, younger and soft-spoken, worked in the kitchen and had a small child who stayed in the nursery cabin during work hours. And Lily, close to Marie's age, was a seamstress responsible for sewing and repairing clothing for the enslaved population and, on occasion, garments for the Beaumont family themselves. She arranged a few belongings she owned on the narrow wooden shelf above her pallet with deliberate care: a small wooden box holding needles and thread, a cloth bundle of dried plants that released a faint medicinal scent, and a leather-bound journal so worn that its cover had softened like fabric from years of handling. The journal was the most dangerous thing she possessed. She kept it wrapped in oilcloth and buried beneath the rest of her belongings, never leaving it visible for long. "You can read?" Dinah asked quietly, watching Marie's hands linger on the journal a moment too long. The question was cautious, nearly whispered, because literacy was a dangerous kind of knowledge. Marie met her gaze evenly, weighing how much truth could be safely revealed. "I can remember things," she said with care. "Recipes, remedies, things my grandmother taught me. Sometimes I make marks to help myself remember, but I don't know if that counts as reading." It was an answer that wasn't quite an answer, implying literacy without openly claiming it. Dinah recognized intelligence in that careful evasion. She nodded slowly. "Best to be careful about what you know and what you don't," she said. "Holt doesn't like slaves who are too clever." "I'll remember that," Marie replied, and she meant it. The following morning, Marie was taken to meet her immediate supervisor, the plantation's head cook, a woman named Patience who had worked at Beaumont Plantation for 3 decades and held significant authority within the domestic hierarchy. Patience was a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s, her hands scarred and thickened from years over hot fires and sharp knives. Her eyes studied Marie with the same thorough attention Dalton had used at the auction, though for entirely different reasons. "You know herbs?" Patience asked, wasting no time. "Yes, ma'am. My grandmother was a healer in Louisiana. She taught me which plants help with fever, which ease pain, which can be made into poultices for wounds." "Can you grow them?" Patience asked. "Or only use it already there?" "I can grow them. I know which plants need full sun, which prefer shade, which grow well together and which must be kept apart. Patience nodded once, satisfied. The herb garden behind the kitchen house has gone to ruin since old Martha died last year. No one else knows enough to keep it right. That'll be your main work. Tend the garden. Prepare remedies when people are sick. Keep records of what you use so supplies can be accounted for. You'll also help in the kitchen when we're short-handed, especially during harvest when we're feeding extra workers. She led Marie behind the kitchen house to the garden, which was in worse condition than Marie had expected. Weeds choked most of the beds, and the remaining plants struggled for light and nutrients. Still, Marie could see the underlying structure of a well-designed garden beneath the neglect. Taller plants had been placed to cast afternoon shade over more delicate ones, and a rain barrel stood positioned beneath the roofline to catch runoff from storms. "I can work with this," Marie said, already planning which plants would be saved, which needed to be removed, and what new herbs should be introduced. "You'll work the garden in the mornings," Patience told her. "Afternoons, you'll be on call for medical needs. If someone's sick in the quarters, you go tend to them. Evenings, you help in the kitchen. Sundays are yours, unless there's an emergency." It was a heavy schedule, but Marie had expected no less. What mattered was that her duties gave her legitimate reason to move freely around the plantation, to speak with people across different divisions, to observe, listen, and quietly collect information. Over the following weeks, Marie settled into her role with methodical efficiency. She restored the herb garden bed by bed, clearing weeds, enriching the soil, relocating struggling plants to more suitable spots. She planted new herbs from seeds and cuttings she had carried with her. Feverfew for headaches, comfort for wounds, chamomile for stomach troubles, valerian for sleep, willow bark for pain and fever. The garden began to thrive again under her care. More importantly, she studied the plantation itself with the same attention she gave her plants. She began to recognize patterns in how decisions were made, how information traveled through the hierarchy, where authority was concentrated and where it fractured. She observed that Cyrus Holt kept meticulous records in the plantation office, ledgers detailing every pound of cotton harvested, every tool issued, every punishment administered, every expense and profit recorded. Those books were the nervous system of the plantation. Anyone who understood them understood how the entire operation functioned. She noticed that the Beaumonts' eldest son, Thomas, had a careless habit of leaving legal papers scattered across the library table when he returned home from his law studies in Vicksburg. He treated documents as if they were invisible to the house slaves who cleaned the room, never considering that those people might read, or at least grasp the importance of what they handled. She observed that the servants who waited at the dinner table often overheard conversations about business arrangements, political alliances, debts, and social obligations. The Beaumont family spoke freely in front of people they considered unseen. Those conversations contained information that could become powerful in the right hands. She saw tensions among the overseers as well. Holt had 2 assistants who competed openly for his approval and for the possibility of promotion. That rivalry created openings, chances to misdirect information, to ensure certain facts reach one man and not the other, to quietly influence outcomes without anyone realizing they were being guided. Within the enslaved community itself, Marie recognized complex social structures. Certain individuals were respected for their skills, others trusted with secrets, still others acknowledged as informal leaders in the quarters. Understanding those networks would be essential if anything meaningful were to be accomplished. Again and again, Marie saw the same truth confirmed. Information, when gathered carefully and shared strategically, could alter the balance of power in ways violence never could. She began cultivating relationships within the plantation's social framework, always with restraint. She never pushed, never appeared overly curious. She was simply helpful, attentive, and patient, allowing trust to form naturally. With Dinah, who oversaw the laundry and moved freely between the quarters and the main house, Marie shared remedies that eased the arthritis crippling Dinah's hands. In return, Dinah spoke casually about the Beaumont family's habits, their moods, their worries. It was never framed as intelligence gathering, just a quiet exchange between women who worked together and shared cramped living space. With Patience, who supervised the kitchen and heard much of what transpired inside the main house, Marie proved herself indispensable. Reliable and capable, someone Patience could depend on without hesitation. In response, Patience gradually began trusting Marie with more details about how the plantation functioned, about upcoming deliveries, scheduled inspections, tension simmering within the Beaumont household itself. With the field hands, Marie offered medical care far more attentive and effective than what they had received from the previous herb woman. She treated injuries and illnesses with both skill and patience, and in return, people began coming to her not only for physical ailments, but also for quiet counsel about other troubles they carried. Within 3 months of her arrival, Marie had established herself as someone useful, someone dependable, someone who noticed things and listened carefully, yet appeared to have no purpose beyond performing her duties well. And then, cautiously, she began to test her methods. The first test came in late April, when a man named Samuel was accused of stealing a ham from the smokehouse. Samuel was a field hand in his 30s, strong and reliable, with a wife named Grace and 2 young children. The accusation was made by one of Holt's assistants, a man named Briggs, who was new to the plantation and eager to demonstrate his vigilance. The evidence appeared straightforward. Samuel had been seen near the smokehouse at an unusual hour, late in the evening after the workday had ended. When the smokehouse inventory was checked the following morning, a ham was missing. A search of the quarters uncovered the ham hidden in a cloth sack near Samuel's cabin, buried beneath loose boards. The standard punishment for theft was 20 lashes, administered publicly, so that the entire enslaved population would witness the consequences of stealing from a master. Sometimes the punishment was harsher if the owner wanted to make a particular example. Samuel protested desperately. He swore he had never taken a ham, had never gone to the smokehouse that evening, had no idea how the meat ended up near his cabin. But his word held no weight against physical evidence and the testimony of an overseer's assistant. He was locked in the plantation jail, a small brick building near the overseer's house, to await punishment at the end of the week, when everyone would be assembled to watch. Marie learned of this on Wednesday evening, when Grace came to her cabin in tears, begging for help. He didn't do it, Grace insisted. Samuel wouldn't steal. He knows what would happen. He wouldn't risk it, not with the children. Someone's lying or someone made a mistake, but he didn't do it. Marie listened closely, asking careful questions. Who had seen him near the smokehouse? Briggs, the new assistant overseer. He claimed he saw Samuel walking in that direction around dusk. Did anyone else see him? No, only Briggs. And the ham was found near your cabin? Yes, buried under loose board behind it. But anyone could have put it there. We don't lock our cabin. Nobody does. Anyone could have hidden it to make it look like Samuel took it. Marie weighed each detail. Tell me about Briggs, she said. What do you know about him? Grace shook her head. Not much. He's only been here a month. Came from somewhere in Alabama. Holt hired him to replace the assistant who left. He's young, maybe 25. Always trying to impress Holt. Always looking for trouble to fix. Has he had any conflict with Samuel? Not that I know of. Samuel barely knows him. Marie stored the information away, her mind already moving through possibilities. I'll see what I can learn, she told Grace. I can't promise anything, but I'll try. Over the next day, Marie gathered information with deliberate precision. She spoke with people who worked near the smokehouse, asking casual questions about who had been around that evening. She talked to those who lived near Samuel's cabin, asking if they had seen anyone unfamiliar nearby. She observed Briggs himself, his behavior, his interactions with the other overseers, his patterns of movement across the plantation, and she discovered something noteworthy. Briggs had received a visit the week before, a younger man, perhaps 20 or 21, who arrived on horseback and stayed in the overseer's quarters for 2 nights. Several people had noticed him, though no one knew his name. He had left early one morning, before most were awake, riding toward the road that led to Natchez. Marie also learned that Briggs had been making small errors in plantation records. Nothing dramatic, but enough to suggest carelessness or something more deliberate. Cotton weights, that didn't quite balance. Tool inventories, slightly miscounted. Minor discrepancies Holt had not yet noticed because Briggs was new and still learning the system. And then she uncovered something else. Cyrus Holt had a nephew, a young man named James, who lived in Vicksburg and had been trying unsuccessfully to secure overseer positions across the region. He was persistent and ambitious, and known for doing whatever was necessary to prove himself. A theory began to take shape in Marie's mind. What if the visitor had been James Holt? What if he had come to see his uncle and, while there, had taken the ham, not to steal it, but to carry it away as a gift? What if Briggs, aware the ham was missing and desperate to prove his usefulness, chose to frame someone rather than admit he didn't know what had happened? What if Samuel had been selected simply because he had been seen nearby at the wrong moment? It was speculation, but it fit the available facts. More importantly, it offered a way to introduce doubt. Marie could not confront Briggs or Holt directly. She had no authority, no standing, no voice in Plantation's formal power structure. But she could place information where it would take root, where others would begin asking questions on their own. She began with patience. The following morning, while helping in the kitchen, Marie mentioned casually that she had been gathering herbs near the overseer's quarters the previous week and had seen a young man leaving early one morning, carrying something wrapped in cloth. Probably just a visitor, Patience said, barely glancing up. Probably, Marie agreed, though he looked a bit like Mr. Holt, now that I think about it. Same build, same way of walking. Could have been family. Patience's hands paused in the dough she was kneading. Holt had a visitor? I don't know for certain, Marie said mildly. Just someone I noticed. Might have been nobody important. But the seed had been planted. Patience, naturally curious and well-positioned within the household, now had something to wonder about, something to quietly carry with her as she went about her work, listening, watching, and thinking. Her own complicated relationship with the overseer hierarchy began to wonder. That evening, she mentioned it casually to Dinah during an ordinary conversation. Dinah, who regularly cleaned the overseer's quarters and would have known if someone had been staying there, confirmed that yes, a visitor had indeed stayed for 2 nights the previous week. Did Holt mention it to Mr. Beaumont? Patience asked. Not that I heard, Dinah replied. But why would he? People have visitors all the time. True, Patience said slowly, though it's strange for a visitor to leave so early in the morning, before breakfast, almost like he was in a hurry or didn't want to be seen. The observation passed quietly through the house slave network, not as an accusation, but as a curiosity. And because house slaves spoke regularly with the Beaumont family members they served, the information eventually reached Eleanora Beaumont. Eleanora managed the household accounts and possessed a sharp instinct for details that didn't quite align. That evening, she mentioned it to her husband, not as a complaint or concern, just as something odd she had heard. Did you know Cyrus had a visitor last week? She asked. Apparently his nephew, though he never mentioned it. Charles Beaumont frowned slightly. He didn't mention it to me. Probably didn't think it important. He paused, though the servant said the young man left very early, before dawn. That does seem unusual. Beaumont trusted his overseer, but he also trusted his wife's attention to domestic details. He stored the information away. The following day, he brought it up casually with Holt, asking if his nephew had been visiting. Holt, clearly caught off guard, admitted that yes, James had stopped by briefly while passing through on his way to Natchez. He hadn't mentioned it because it seemed insignificant, just a family visit, unrelated to plantation business. Of course, Beaumont said evenly, though I do prefer to know who's on the property. For security reasons, you understand. Of course, sir, Holt replied. I should have mentioned it. It won't happen again. But the exchange planted a quiet seed of doubt in Beaumont's mind. Why hadn't Holt mentioned the visit? And what else might he be omitting? At the same time, Marie had been working from another direction. She had noticed the small discrepancies in Briggs's record-keeping and mentioned them very carefully to the plantation's bookkeeper, an elderly white man named Porter who visited twice a week to review the accounts. She did this while treating Porter for his rheumatism, preparing a poultice that genuinely eases pain. As she applied it, she mentioned, almost apologetically, that she might be mistaken, but she thought she had heard people say more cotton had been harvested than what was written in the records. "I'm sure I misunderstood," she said. "I don't know much about numbers, but I thought someone said 42 bushels, and the book said 40. Porter, meticulous by nature, made a note to review the Cotton House ledgers more closely. When he did, he found several small inconsistencies, nothing dramatic, but enough to suggest carelessness or possible falsification. He reported this to Beaumont, who questioned Holt. Holt, unaware of the errors, was forced to admit that his new assistant, Briggs, might be making mistakes. "He's still learning our systems," Holt explained. "I'll supervise him more closely." But it marked another strike against Briggs's reliability, another reason for doubt. Then Marie set her final piece in motion. She arranged for information to reach Beaumont, suggesting the smokehouse inventory might be inaccurate. She mentioned to Dinah that she had heard someone say more than one ham might be missing. Dinah repeated it to Eleonora while doing laundry. Eleonora passed it on to her husband. Beaumont ordered a complete inventory of the smokehouse. When it was finished, they discovered that 3 hams were missing, not 1. The ham found near Samuel's cabin was examined again and found to have been cut with a blade different from those issued to the enslaved population, a finer knife, the kind a gentleman might carry. Suddenly, the case against Samuel no longer appeared solid. If 3 hams were missing, and if the recovered one bore marks of a different blade, then it was possible Samuel had not taken it all. It suggested another explanation, that someone else, possibly Holt's nephew, had taken the hams, perhaps as a gift, and that Briggs, discovering the loss and unwilling to admit ignorance, had framed Samuel by planting one of them near his cabin. It was still speculation, but it introduced enough doubt that Beaumont could not proceed with punishment in good conscience. Samuel was released with the official explanation that the evidence was insufficient to establish guilt. He returned to his family shaken, but unharmed. Briggs was reprimanded for errors in his record-keeping and warned to be more cautious in making accusations. Holt was instructed to report any future visitors to plantation management, and Marie, who had orchestrated the entire sequence through observation and carefully placed conversations, continued tending her herb garden as if nothing had occurred. But among the enslaved population, word spread, quietly, through the subtle communication networks that connected people across the plantation. Within days, many understood that Marie Laveau was someone who noticed things, who understood how power operated, and who knew how to place small pieces of information into that machinery to change its outcome. People began coming to her not only for remedies for their bodies, but for something else. The second case came in June, when a woman named Clara was threatened with sale. Clara was in her late 20s, a skilled seamstress who made clothing for the enslaved population and occasionally for the Beaumont family. She had an 8-year-old daughter who worked in the main house as an assistant to the cook. The threat arose because Charles Beaumont had accumulated debts from a failed cotton speculation. He had invested heavily in cotton futures, expecting prices to rise, but instead they fell, leaving him indebted to several creditors. One of those creditors was a Louisiana planter named Garrett, who offered to forgive part of the debt in exchange for several enslaved people, including Clara. Garrett's reputation was well known throughout the region. He was considered one of the most brutal owners in Louisiana. Stories circulated about enslaved people who had been sold to Garrett's plantation and died within months from relentless labor and brutal mistreatment. Being sent to Garrett was considered only marginally better than being sold farther south, to the deep South plantations where conditions were even worse. When Clara came to Marie, she was frantic. "They're going to sell me," she whispered, tears running down her face. "Mr. Beaumont told Holt to prepare the papers for me and 3 others. We're being sent to Garrett in Louisiana to settle a debt. My daughter will stay here. They're separating us. Please, Marie, I know you helped Samuel. please help me?" Marie listened closely, her thoughts already turning over the problem. This situation was far more complicated than Samuel's case. It involved the Beaumont family's finances directly, not just an overseer's error. The stakes were higher, and the risks of failure were much greater. "Tell me everything you know about this debt," Marie said. "How much does Mr. Beaumont owe? When is the sale supposed to happen? And what do you know about Garrett?" Over the next several days, Marie gathered information from every source she could reach. She learned that Beaumont owed Garrett roughly $3,000, a substantial sum. She learned the sale was scheduled for the end of the month, leaving her less than 3 weeks to intervene. She confirmed that Garrett's reputation was well-deserved, and that he was also entangled in questionable business dealings that had earned him enemies among other planners. Most importantly, she discovered that Thomas Beaumont, the son studying law, had recently been hired to represent another planner named Whitfield in a land dispute. Garrett was the opposing party in that case. Thomas was actively working against Garrett in court, while his father was negotiating to sell enslaved people to him. That contradiction was the leverage Marie needed. She began shaping a plan that would make the sale socially and professionally damaging for the Beaumont family. She could not stop it directly. She had no authority to do that, but she could raise the cost of proceeding until it outweighed the benefit of settling the debt. The first step was ensuring that Thomas Beaumont learned about the sale, if he had not already. She accomplished this through the house slave network. Information moved quietly from Clara to Dinah, then to the house butler, who mentioned it to Thomas during one of his visits home from Vicksburg. Thomas had indeed been unaware, and the news unsettled him. Selling enslaved people to a man he was opposing in court created a clear conflict of interest that could damage his professional standing. He raised his concerns with his father. But Charles Beaumont was under financial pressure and saw no easy alternative. The debt needed to be paid, and Garrett's offer was the most straightforward solution available. Marie understood that she needed to create another option, one that would be more appealing than selling people to Garrett. She began collecting information about Beaumont's other creditors and about potential sources of capital that might allow the debt to be paid without a sale. This meant accessing details normally far beyond her reach: financial records, business correspondence, and private discussions. She did this through careful observation and deliberate questioning. She listened to fragments of conversations overheard by house slaves. She read documents Thomas left unattended in the library, moving quickly and memorizing what she could. When delivering herbs to the main house, she spoke with enslaved people from neighboring plantations who passed through Beaumont, quietly gathering information about financial conditions and business rivalries across the region. Eventually, she uncovered something useful. A planter named Prescott, who owned land about 20 miles away, had recently come into a large sum of money from selling a parcel of land. Prescott was looking for new investment opportunities and had a long-standing rivalry with Garrett that made him inclined to oppose Garrett whenever possible. Marie could not approach Prescott herself. He would never take a business proposition from an enslaved woman seriously. But she could ensure that information about the Beaumont family's financial situation reached him through channels that framed it as opportunity rather than desperation. She set this in motion carefully. She mentioned to a man named Peter, an enslaved worker for a merchant family in Natchez, that she had heard the Beaumonts were quietly seeking alternative financing for business debts. Peter passed a remark to his owners, who mentioned it in casual conversation to other merchants. From there, the information filtered through business networks until it reached Prescott. Prescott, already looking for investments and eager to undermine Garrett, recognized the opportunity. He approached Beaumont with an offer. He would provide a loan on favorable terms to pay off the debt to Garrett. In return, Beaumont would grant him a share of the next cotton harvest and agree to use Prescott's cotton broker for future sales. Beaumont, presented with a way to resolve his debt without selling enslaved people and without entangling himself further with Garrett, accepted the proposal. The sale was canceled. Clara remained at Beaumont Plantation with her daughter. Clara never learned the full extent of what Marie had done. She knew only that the sale had been called off, that she would not be separated from her child, and that somehow, against all odds, things had worked out. But within the enslaved community, understanding began to spread. It became clear that Marie Laveau was not operating on luck or coincidence. She was manipulating the plantation's power structure with a precision that suggested deep insight into how it functioned. By the fall of 1840, Marie had become a figure of quiet authority in the quarters. People came to her not only for medicine, but for guidance with problems that seemed impossible to solve. A man whose wife had been threatened with sale to another plantation. A woman whose son had been falsely accused of breaking a valuable tool. A couple who wanted to marry but knew the overseer would separate them out of spite because the man had once challenged his authority. Marie listened to all of them. She asked questions that seemed unrelated. Who was present when the accusation was made? What else had happened that day? What conversations had been overheard? What patterns had they noticed in the overseer's behavior or in the Beaumont household itself? Family's decisions. Then, with what seemed like limitless patience, she would begin to work. She never acted directly. She never confronted anyone in authority, never made accusations, never placed herself openly in danger. Instead, she planted information the same way she planted seeds in her garden, carefully in the right soil at the right moment, and then she waited for it to grow. Each intervention followed a familiar pattern. First, she gathered information from multiple sources until she understood the full context of the problem. Second, she identified leverage points, places where small pieces of information could produce large shifts in outcome. Third, she introduced that information through trusted intermediaries who passed it along without knowing its ultimate purpose. Fourth, she waited as the information moved through the system and reshaped decisions. Fifth, she remained invisible throughout the entire process so that no one could trace the result back to her. It was a method that demanded patience, intelligence, and a deep understanding of human psychology and social structures. Marie possessed all three. When a man named Joseph was accused of laziness and threatened with punishment, Marie learned that the accusation had come from Briggs, the assistant overseer still desperate to restore his reputation after the Samuel incident. She also discovered that Briggs had been making errors in the cotton weight records, small discrepancies that pointed to either incompetence or theft. During a routine visit to treat the bookkeeper's rheumatism, Marie mentioned the inconsistencies, as if she were confused by the numbers she had seen. The bookkeeper investigated, found the errors, and reported them to Beaumont. Briggs was dismissed, and Joseph's supposed laziness vanished amid the larger scandal of falsified records. When a woman named Ruth was being harassed by one of the Beaumont family's visiting relatives, Marie uncovered information about the man's debts and gambling habits. She ensured that this information reached the man's wife through a chain of gossip that made it seem like common knowledge rather than deliberate exposure. The wife confronted her husband, who left the plantation in disgrace. Ruth was left unharmed. When a couple named Daniel and Esther wanted to marry, but feared the overseer would separate them, Marie learned that the overseer had been skimming supplies from the plantation stores and selling them in Natchez for personal profit. She arranged for evidence of the theft to reach Beaumont through the bookkeeper. The overseer was dismissed, and his replacement raised no objection to Daniel and Esther's marriage. Each intervention was small, nearly invisible, but taken together, they began to create something larger, a growing sense among the enslaved population that they were not entirely powerless, that there were forms of resistance that did not require violence or escape, that information and intelligence could be weapons as effective as any physical force. Marie became a legend in the quarters, though never openly. People did not speak her name loudly or credit her directly for specific outcomes, but they understood she was someone who could help, someone who noticed patterns others missed, someone who knew how to work within the system to change its results. And that kind of influence, even when exercised quietly, eventually draws dangerous attention. Cyrus Holt was not a foolish man. He had worked as an overseer for 15 years on plantations across Mississippi and Louisiana, and he knew how to recognize signs of trouble. He understood the indicators of rebellion. Secret meetings, hushed conversations that stopped when he approached, unusual movement at night, weapons being hidden or fashioned. But Marie Laveau fit none of those patterns. She held no secret gatherings. She did not whisper conspiratorially. She did not move about at strange hours or show interest in weapons or escape. She tended her garden, prepared her remedies, and carried out her duties with quiet efficiency. Yet things continued to happen around her. Accusations collapsed. Punishments were avoided. His authority was undermined in subtle ways he could not trace to a single source. And when he paid closer attention, he noticed that Marie often seemed to be nearby, not directly involved, but somehow connected. By the summer of 1840, Holt was watching her carefully. He had no proof. Marie was too cautious for that. But suspicion does not require proof. And Holt's suspicion deepened with each incident that resolved too conveniently in favor of the enslaved. He began asking questions. He spoke with other overseers, inquiring whether they had noticed anything unusual about her. He observed her movements, noting where she went and who she spoke with. He searched for evidence of wrongdoing, hidden papers, secret meetings, anything that might justify punishment. Marie had anticipated this from the beginning. She knew success would eventually attract scrutiny, and she had prepared for it. She became even more careful, more restrained in her movements and words. She stopped intervening in situations where the risk was too great and focused instead on smaller matters that would not draw direct attention. At the same time, she cultivated a reputation for simplicity and superstition, a woman skilled in folk remedies and old beliefs, but lacking real understanding of power or politics. She occasionally made remarks that sounded naive or confused. She asked questions that suggested she did not understand how decisions were made. She presented herself as capable with plants, but not especially intelligent in other ways. It was a performance precisely calibrated to make her seem less threatening than she truly was. It worked to a point. Holt remained suspicious, but he found no evidence to support his instincts. And without evidence, he could not act. Still, the tension between them continued to build. Marie understood that eventually something would force a confrontation. That moment came in September of 1840, when a situation arose that Marie could not ignore, even though intervening would place her in serious danger. Thomas Beaumont, the lawyer's son, had married Catherine Hartwell earlier that spring, a union that brought significant social and financial advantages to the Beaumont family. The Hartwells were among the most prominent families in Vicksburg, with connections to banking, cotton trading, and state politics. The marriage had been carefully arranged, and both families had invested significant effort to ensure it appeared respectable and stable. But by September, Thomas's true character had begun to surface. He visited the plantation frequently, ostensibly to manage legal matters for his father, but also to escape the scrutiny of his wife and her family in Vicksburg. During those visits, his attention settled on a girl named Ruth, who worked in the main house as an assistant to the cook. Ruth was 16 years old, the daughter of Hannah, who oversaw the household linens. She was quiet and diligent, tried to remain invisible in a way young enslaved women learned to do when they attracted the wrong kind of attention from men with power. But once Thomas focused on her, his interest was difficult to avoid. He began finding reasons to be in the kitchen while Ruth was working. He commented on her appearance, asked questions unrelated to her duties, brushed her arm or shoulder in ways that were meant to seem casual but were not. Hannah noticed immediately and was terrified. She understood exactly what Thomas's attention meant. She knew Ruth had no ability to refuse him without facing punishment. She knew that if Thomas chose to act on his interest, there would be nothing she could do to protect her daughter. Late one evening, when the quarters were quiet, Hannah came to Marie in desperation. "He's going to ruin her," she whispered, tears running down her face. "I can see it in how he looks at her, how he talks to her. It's only a matter of time before he decides to take what he wants. And there's nothing I can do. If I object, we'll both be sold. If Ruth resists, she'll be punished. Please, Marie, I know you can't stop him directly, But there has to be something. There has to be some way to protect her. Marie sat in silence for a long time, weighing possibilities and risks. This was unlike her previous interventions. This involved the Beaumont family directly, not overseers or business associates. This involved Thomas himself, educated, intelligent, and well-connected. The danger was far greater. But Marie also knew that doing nothing would mean Ruth's suffering, and that her own quiet authority within the community would become meaningless. Knowledge only had power if it was used, even when the cost was high. "Tell me everything you know about Thomas Beaumont," Marie said at last. "His habits, his friends, his business dealings, his debts, his marriage. Everything you've heard while working in a house." Over the next week, Hannah and other house slaves provided Marie with a detailed portrait of Thomas Beaumont's life. The information was extensive. Thomas was 26 years old, ambitious, and determined to build a name for himself in Mississippi politics. He viewed his legal practice as a stepping stone to public office, perhaps a seat in the state legislature or even Congress someday. His marriage to Catherine Hartwell was central to those ambitions. The Hartwells possessed wealth, influence, and social standing that Thomas needed. Catherine's father, William Hartwell, was a banker with significant influence in Vicksburg and connections across the state. Her uncle served as a state senator. The marriage had been as much a calculated alliance as a romantic union. But Thomas also carried debts. He had lost money in the same cotton speculation scheme that had troubled his father. He had accumulated gambling losses in Vicksburg. He lived beyond his means, sustaining a lifestyle that depended on his father's support and the expectation of future access to Hartwell wealth. Above all, Thomas had a reputation to maintain. He presented himself as a gentleman, honorable, refined, worthy of the Hartwell family's trust and investment. Any scandal, any hint of impropriety, could damage that image and threaten both his marriage and his political future. Catherine's mother, Mrs. Hartwell, was known as a woman of strict moral standards who took her family's reputation seriously. She had been skeptical of Thomas from the beginning, concerned that he had married Catherine for money rather than affection, and she had made it clear that she intended to watch his behavior closely. Marie absorbed all of this, turning it over in her mind, searching for leverage. She could not confront Thomas directly. That would be fatal. She could not warn Catherine. The word of an enslaved woman would never outweigh a white man's denial. She could not even ensure Ruth was never alone with Thomas, because he had the authority to summon her at will. But she could make Thomas aware that his behavior was being noticed, and that those observations might reach people capable of destroying his reputation and ambitions. The plan she formed was more complex and more dangerous than anything she had attempted before. It required precise timing, multiple intermediaries, and a deep understanding of the social networks that bound the planter class together. Marie began by ensuring that Ruth was never alone when Thomas was present. She arranged for Ruth's work schedule to change so that she was always in the kitchen when others were there, never isolated in rooms where Thomas could corner her. This was presented to patients as a matter of efficiency. Ruth could learn more by working alongside experienced cooks, and having several people in the kitchen during busy periods made the work go faster. Patients, who had her own quiet concerns about Thomas's behavior, agreed without pressing for explanations. But Marie knew this was only a temporary measure. Thomas would eventually find another opportunity, or he would simply order Ruth to come to him privately. She needed to create a situation in which Thomas himself decided that pursuing Ruth was too dangerous. The key was Mrs. Hartwell, Catherine's mother. If Mrs. Hartwell grew concerned about Thomas's character, if she began scrutinizing his behavior more closely, if she made it clear that scandal would have consequences, then Thomas might reconsider. But Marie, an enslaved woman with no access to the Hartwell family, had no direct way to influence Mrs. Hartwell's perceptions. The answer lay in the complex social networks connecting plantation families throughout the region. Information flowed constantly through those networks: gossip, rumors, observations, quiet concerns. If Marie could place the right information into that system, it would eventually reach Mrs. Hartwell. through channels that appeared entirely natural. Marie learned that Mrs. Hartwell planned to travel to Natchez in October to attend a series of social gatherings. During her visit, she would be staying with friends, the Chambers family, who owned a plantation roughly 10 miles from Beaumont. Marie began cultivating a relationship with a man named Peter, an enslaved worker on the Chambers plantation. She did this by sending herbs and remedies to the Chambers household, gradually establishing herself as a reliable source of medical care. Peter, who suffered from frequent headaches, became a regular recipient of Marie's fever tea, and in return he shared information about life on the Chambers plantation. Through Peter, Marie learned which social events Mrs. Hartwell would attend, which families would be present, and what topics were likely to dominate conversation. Only then did she begin planting seeds that would grow into quiet concerns about Thomas Beaumont's character. She started by speaking casually with Peter about plantation life in general, about the difficulties of working in households where young men sometimes behaved inappropriately toward enslaved women. She never mentioned Thomas by name. She never made direct accusations. She spoke only in general terms, observations about patterns she had seen elsewhere, about how certain habits of young men in the planter class might trouble their wives' families if they were known. Peter understood the implication. He began having similar conversations with other enslaved people in the Chambers household. Those conversations filtered slowly upward, eventually reaching the Chambers family's house slaves, who mentioned them to their owners in the careful, indirect way house slaves learn to convey information. Mrs. Chambers, who was hosting Mrs. Hartwell and wanted her guests to feel both comfortable and informed, mentioned in passing that she hoped Thomas Beaumont was treating Catherine well. She added that she had heard some young men in the region had reputations for behaving less honorably than they appeared. Mrs. Hartwell, already protective of her daughter and already somewhat skeptical of Thomas, asked what Mrs. Chambers had heard. Mrs. Chambers, unwilling to make specific claims without evidence, replied that she had heard only vague concerns, nothing concrete, probably nothing to worry about. Still, she suggested that Mrs. Hartwell might want to observe Thomas a bit more closely during her visit, just to be certain he was the man he claimed to be. The conversation seemed harmless, but it planted a seed of doubt. Mrs. Hartwell began paying closer attention to Thomas's behavior. She asked Catherine careful questions about her marriage. She watched how Thomas interacted with others. At the same time, Marie worked another angle. She learned that Thomas had been seen several times at a gambling house in Natchez, losing money he could not afford. This information came from enslaved workers in Natchez, people who saw far more than white society ever acknowledged. Marie ensured this information also entered the social network through indirect paths. A slave working at the gambling house mentioned Thomas's presence to another enslaved man employed by a merchant family. That observation passed through several conversations until it reached the Chambers household, and from there, Mrs. Hartwell. Now genuinely concerned, Mrs. Hartwell wrote to her husband in Vicksburg, expressing worry about Thomas's character and his treatment of their daughter. William Hartwell, who had invested heavily in Thomas's future and expected returns on that investment, decided it was time for a serious conversation with his son-in-law about expectations, conduct, and reputation. That discussion, combined with Mrs. Hartwell's increased scrutiny, made Thomas acutely aware that his behavior was being watched and that any scandal could destroy everything he had worked toward. Meanwhile, Marie arranged for Thomas to realize that his interest in Ruth had not gone unnoticed. She orchestrated this through a conversation he overheard while passing near the kitchen. Hannah was speaking with Patience, voicing concern about Ruth's safety and mentioning that she had noticed one of the Beaumont family members paying inappropriate attention to her daughter. The conversation was loud enough for Thomas to hear, but not so loud that it felt staged. It sounded like a private exchange between worried women, the sort of conversation that happened constantly among the enslaved but that white men rarely overheard. Hearing this, Thomas understood that his interest in Ruth was not invisible. If the enslaved were already talking about it, then there was a real risk the information could reach his wife, his in-laws, or the broader social network that shaped his reputation. The combined pressure of his mother-in-law's scrutiny, the awareness that his behavior was being observed, and the looming risk of scandal forced him to reconsider. He began avoiding the kitchen when Ruth was working. He redirected his attention to his legal work and political ambitions, presenting himself as the honorable gentleman he claimed to be. Ruth, never knowing the intricate web of information and influence woven around her, simply found that Thomas's attention had drifted elsewhere. She remained safe, continuing her work in the kitchen, unaware of how close she had come to disaster or who protected her. But Marie's intervention did not go unnoticed by Cyrus Holt. He could not trace the precise mechanisms. The information had moved through too many hands, filtered through too many conversations. Still, he knew something had happened, something that had shielded Ruth from Thomas's attention, and he suspected Marie was at the center of it. He had been watching her for months, searching for proof of wrongdoing, and this episode confirmed his suspicions. She was too intelligent, too connected, too influential. She was manipulating events in ways that undermined the plantation's power structure, and that made her dangerous. In November of 1840, Holt made his move. He accused Marie of practicing witchcraft, of using supernatural means to influence events on the plantation. It was a grave accusation, one that could lead to severe punishment or even death. The charge was fueled partly by superstition. Holt genuinely believed Marie's influence was unnatural, that no enslaved woman could accomplish what he suspected she was doing without some kind of supernatural aid. But it was also a calculated move. Accusations of witchcraft were difficult to disprove and carried heavy penalties. If Holt could make the charge stick, he would remove Marie permanently. Remove her, but suspicion and superstition are not enough. The accusation had been placed before Charles Beaumont, who was legally required to investigate any claims of witchcraft or rebellion among the enslaved population. Such charges were taken seriously throughout the South, where fear of slave uprisings was constant and where any suggestion of supernatural influence was viewed as especially dangerous. Marie was brought into the main house on a cold November morning and made to stand before Beaumont and Holt in the library, a room where so many decisions affecting her life and the lives of others had been made. The walls were lined with books, visible symbols of knowledge and authority, reminders of the education and power the planter class claimed as their exclusive right. Charles Beaumont sat behind his desk, studying Marie with an expression that revealed little. He was an intelligent, educated man, capable of rational thought, but also a product of his time and place, raised to believe that enslaved people were inherently inferior, incapable of the kind of strategic thinking Marie had demonstrated. "These are serious accusations," Beaumont said gravely. "Mr. Holt claims you've been using unnatural means to influence events on this plantation. He says things happen around you that cannot be explained by ordinary causes, that you possess knowledge you should not have, that you affect outcomes in ways suggesting supernatural power. What do you say to these charges?" Marie kept her eyes lowered, her posture submissive, her voice calm and restrained. She had prepared for this moment, knowing it would eventually come. Everything depended on how she handled the next few minutes. "Sir, I am an herb woman," she said carefully. "I grow plants and prepare remedies, just as I was instructed when I came to this plantation. I know which herbs help with fever, which ease pain, which can be made into poultices for wounds. My grandmother taught me these things when I was young, and I have practiced them all my life. But I know nothing of witchcraft or unnatural matters. I only do the work I was given." "Mr. Holt says people come to you for more than remedies," Beaumont continued, "that you give them counsel, that things change after they speak with you, that you seem to know things you should not know, that you influence events you should not be able to influence." "People talk to me, sir," Marie said quietly. "Yes, they speak of their troubles, the way people do when they are sick or in pain. When the body suffers, the mind does too. Sometimes people need to speak of their worries, as much as they need medicine. I listen, because listening is part of healing. My grandmother taught me that as well." And do you give them advice? Beaumont asked. Sometimes, sir, if they ask, but only simple advice, the kind anyone might give. If someone fears being accused of something, I might suggest they speak to the overseer and explain themselves. If someone worries about a family matter, I might suggest they bring it to you or Mrs. Beaumont if it is serious. I have no power to change anything myself. I am only a slave who tends plants and listens to people's troubles. It was a flawless response, humble, reasonable, impossible to disprove. She presented herself as someone skilled in a narrow task, with no grasp of broader power structures, someone who offered only the most basic guidance any person might give. Holt's face tightened with frustration. She's lying, he said sharply. She's manipulating people. She knows things she shouldn't know. She influences matters she shouldn't be able to influence. She's far too clever. Being clever is not the same as practicing witchcraft, Beaumont replied calmly. Intelligence is not supernatural. But she's a slave, Holt protested. Slaves aren't supposed to be that intelligent. Beaumont looked at him with an expression suggesting he found the argument weak. I have known many intelligent enslaved people, Mr. Holt. Intelligence is not confined to any race or condition. Marie is clearly intelligent and clearly skilled at her work. That does not make her a witch. He turned back to Marie. Do you read and write? It was a dangerous question. Literacy among enslaved people was illegal in Mississippi. Admitting to it could bring punishment. Denying it, if Beaumont already had evidence, could be just as dangerous. I can read some, sir, Marie said cautiously. My previous owner in Louisiana allowed it, so I could read receipts for herb orders and keep records of remedies. I know it is not allowed here, and I have not taught anyone else. I use it only for my work, to keep track of which plants I have and which remedies I prepare. I make marks to help myself remember. I don't know if that counts as proper writing. Beaumont nodded slowly. He opened a drawer in his desk and removed a familiar object, Marie's worn leather journal, the one she believed she had kept hidden in her cabin. Her heart dropped. Someone had searched her belongings and found it. This is yours, Beaumont asked, holding it up. Yes, sir. What is in it? Recipes for remedies, sir. Notes about which plants grow well together, which need more water or more sun. Things my grandmother taught me that I wanted to remember. Beaumont opened the journal and read through several pages. Marie had been careful. The book contained exactly what she claimed, plant recipes, garden notes, but it also held her observations about plantation operations, patterns she had noticed, relationships between people. Those entries were written in a kind of code, using plant names and gardening metaphors to conceal their true meaning. To someone unfamiliar with the code, it appeared to be nothing more than an herb woman's notebook. To someone who understood, it revealed the outline of a sophisticated intelligence network. Beaumont read in silence, his expression thoughtful. Marie could not tell whether he grasped what he was seeing or saw only harmless notes. At last, he closed the journal and set on the desk. I find no evidence of witchcraft here, he said. These are notes about plants and remedies, exactly as Marie described. She is literate and intelligent, qualities that make her valuable in her role as an herb woman. As long as she continues to perform her duties and causes no direct trouble, I see no reason to punish her. He turned to Holt. Your concerns are noted, Mr. Holt, but I will not act on suspicion alone. If you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, evidence of rebellion, theft, or deliberate sabotage, bring it to me and I will act. But intelligence and literacy are not crimes, and I will not punish a valuable slave simply for being clever. It was a reprieve, but Marie understood it was also a warning. Beaumont had made it clear that he suspected what she was doing, even if he could not prove it, and that he would tolerate it only as long as it did not directly threaten his interests. A boundary had been drawn. Crossing it would bring consequences. You may return to your work, Beaumont said, but understand that you are being watched. If I have reason to believe you are causing trouble, I will not be so lenient next time. Yes, sir, Marie replied quietly. "Thank you, sir." She left the library with her journal still resting on Beaumont's desk. She did not ask for it back. That would have been too bold, too revealing. She would have to begin a new one and be even more careful about what she recorded and where she kept it. What mattered was that she had survived the confrontation. After that encounter, Marie adjusted her methods. She became even more cautious, even more selective about when and how she intervened. She focused on situations where the outcome would benefit the enslaved community without directly threatening plantation operations or the Beaumont family's financial interests. At the same time, she began quietly teaching others what she knew. She trained trusted people to observe, to listen, to gather information, and to plant influence carefully. Dinah became one of her students, learning how to collect information within the main house and pass it through trusted channels. Hannah learned to recognize patterns in the Beaumont family's behavior and anticipate their decisions. Peter, on the Chambers plantation, became a node in a growing network that connected enslaved people across multiple plantations in the region. Marie was building something larger than herself, a system that could survive even if she were sold, punished, or killed. She was teaching that intelligence and information were weapons, that resistance did not always look like open rebellion, and that power could be challenged through subtle means that left no trace. But Marie also began to think about something even more ambitious. Freedom, not escape. Escape was dangerous, often unsuccessful, and left behind those who could not flee. She was thinking about legal freedom, achieved through the mechanisms the system itself provided. She learned that there were legal processes through which enslaved people could sometimes purchase their freedom or be manumitted by their owners. These paths were rare and difficult, but they existed. In Louisiana, the laws were somewhat more flexible than in Mississippi. Free people of color could own property, operate businesses, and form communities in places like New Orleans. Some had achieved freedom through legal means, and sometimes helped others do the same. Marie began gathering information about these processes, the legal requirements, the costs, the individuals who might be able to assist. She learned through the network she had built, through conversations with enslaved people who had connections to free Black communities, and through careful examination of legal documents Thomas Beaumont left scattered in the library. Slowly, she began to consider how freedom might be achieved, not only for herself, but for others as well. In 1841, Marie learned that Charles Beaumont was facing serious financial difficulties. The cotton market had been unstable for years, with prices fluctuating wildly due to weather, international trade pressures, and speculation by brokers. Beaumont had made investments assuming prices would remain high. Instead, they fell, and his debts were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Marie learned this from multiple sources. House slaves overheard conversations between Charles and Eleanor Beaumont and passed the information through the network. She glimpsed correspondence from creditors while the library was being cleaned. She overheard Thomas discussing his father's financial troubles with Catherine during one of their visits. The situation had grown serious enough that Beaumont was considering selling part of the enslaved population to raise capital. For the community, this was a crisis. Sales meant families torn apart, people sent to distant plantations where conditions might be far worse. The network Marie had built could be shattered overnight. She began gathering information about Beaumont's finances with systematic precision. She learned the names of creditors, the amounts owed, and payment deadlines. She learned about Beaumont's assets, land holdings, and business partnerships. She studied the cotton market, prices, trends, which brokers were reliable and which were not. She collected information from dozens of sources. Conversations overheard by house slaves, documents glimpsed in the library and plantation office, casual remarks by visitors, and intelligence passed through enslaved people connected to other plantations. Then she began searching for leverage, ways to help Beaumont resolve his financial problems without selling people. She discovered that one of Beaumont's major creditors, a Natchez banker named Sutton, had recently been involved in a scandal involving fraudulent land sales. The scandal had not yet become public, but rumors circulated within certain business circles. Sutton had been selling land he did not truly own, or land with unclear titles, to investors who failed to verify records. Several people had already lost money, and there was talk of legal action. Marie also learned that Sutton was desperate to protect his reputation and would be vulnerable to pressure from anyone who could expose his dealings. But she could not use this information directly. She had no standing, no voice in the financial world. Instead, she needed to ensure the information reached someone who did, someone motivated to act on it. She learned that Sutton had a rival in Natchez, a banker named Prescott, who competed fiercely for influence. Prescott was ambitious, ruthless, and always seeking opportunities to weaken competitors. Through a carefully constructed chain of intermediaries, Marie arranged for information about Sutton's fraudulent land dealings to reach Prescott. It was framed as a rumor overheard by an enslaved worker in Sutton's household, then passed along quietly through merchant circles, gaining weight with each retelling until it reached someone who could act on it. The informal networks that linked enslaved people across plantations, towns, and businesses. The chain unfolded with deliberate precision. Marie first mentioned to Peter, who worked on the Chamber's plantation, that she had heard troubling rumors about questionable land transactions in Natchez. Peter passed this along to an enslaved man employed by a merchant family in Natchez. That man then mentioned it to another enslaved worker in Sutton's household, asking quietly whether there was any truth to the stories. That worker, who had seen documents related to Sutton's land sales, confirmed that there did indeed seem to be serious problems with some of the titles Sutton was selling. That confirmation traveled back through the same chain, gaining weight and credibility with each retelling. Eventually, the information reached a free black man in Natchez who had business dealings with Prescott's bank. Seeing an opportunity to gain favor with Prescott, he repeated the rumors to one of Prescott's associates. Prescott investigated and discovered the rumors were true. He immediately recognized a chance to weaken a rival while expanding his own influence. Prescott approached several of Sutton's clients, including Charles Beaumont, with an offer. He would provide loans on favorable terms to allow them to pay off their debts to Sutton. In exchange, they would transfer their banking business to Prescott's institution. Beaumont, seeing a way out of his financial crisis without selling enslaved people, accepted. Prescott issued a loan that cleared Beaumont's debts, and Beaumont agreed to use Prescott's bank for future transactions and to grant Prescott a share of the next cotton harvest. The crisis passed. The enslaved population at Beaumont Plantation remained intact. No families were separated, and no one except Marie understood that she had orchestrated the entire sequence, that she had identified the leverage point, constructed a communication chain, and ensured the right information reached the right person at exactly the right moment. To everyone else, it appeared to be nothing more than fortunate timing, an ordinary business rivalry. Over the next 3 years, from 1841 to 1844, Marie continued her work with growing sophistication. She intervened in dozens of situations, protecting people, preventing separations, and softening punishments. She became a legend among the enslaved, not only at Beaumont but across the region, as word of her method spread through the invisible networks connecting plantations. But she also began using her influence for something even more ambitious, facilitating freedom. Marie learned that there were several legal mechanisms through which enslaved people could sometimes obtain freedom. The first was manumission by an owner, in which an owner voluntarily freed an enslaved person, usually in recognition of long service or special circumstances. This was rare, but it did happen. The second was self-purchase, where an enslaved person allowed to earn money could buy their own freedom. This required the owner's consent and was possible primarily in places like Louisiana, where laws permitted it. The third was purchased by a free person of color, in which someone already free would buy an enslaved person with the intention of freeing them, often done by relatives or by free black communities working collectively. The fourth was legal challenge, based on flaws in ownership records or sale documents. This was difficult and uncommon, but occasionally enslavement could be proven legally invalid. Marie began identifying people who might qualify under one of these paths. She looked for individuals with valuable skills that might make an owner consider self-purchase. She sought out those with connections to free Black communities in Louisiana. She listened for hints of legal irregularities that might be challenged. And then she began quietly creating conditions where freedom became possible. For a man named Daniel, an exceptionally skilled carpenter, Marie arranged opportunities that allowed his talent to be noticed beyond plantation. She mentioned his abilities to house slaves employed by prominent Natchez families. Those slaves passed word to their employers, who began requesting Daniel's services from Beaumont. Daniel's work impressed everyone who hired him. Families offered premium payments for his craftsmanship. Beaumont, recognizing a chance for profit, began hiring Daniel out regularly and allowed him to keep a small portion of his earnings. Over several years, Daniel saved enough money to make an offer to purchase his freedom. By that time, Beaumont's finances had stabilized, and he recognized that Daniel was more valuable as a free craftsman who could be contracted as needed than as an enslaved worker who required upkeep. Beaumont agreed. Daniel became a free man in 1843 at the age of 35. For a woman named Esther, Marie's approach was different. Esther had saved money for years by selling vegetables and eggs from her small garden plot to other enslaved people and occasionally to white families. By the time Marie intervened, Esther had accumulated nearly $200, a remarkable sum. But Esther had no idea how to approach Beaumont, did not understand the legal process of manumission, and did not even know whether it was possible. Marie arranged for Esther to meet a free Black woman in Natchez named Eliza during one of Esther's trips to sell produce. Eliza explained the legal requirements, connected Esther with a lawyer willing to handle such cases, and helped to prepare a proposal to present to Beaumont. The proposal was carefully designed to appeal to Beaumont's financial interests. Esther offered not only the $200 she had saved, but also a commitment to continue supplying vegetables to the plantation at reduced prices for the next 5 years. The total value of the offer approached $400, a fair price for a woman of Esther's age and abilities. By 1844, Beaumont was in a stronger financial position and recognized Esther's long record of reliable service. He accepted the proposal. Esther became a free woman, though she chose to remain nearby and maintain her ties to the enslaved community. Each case required months or years of careful planning. But gradually, people began achieving freedom through legal means, one life at a time, through the very systems designed to deny them power, in ways that left no trace back to Marie's hand. By 1844, Marie herself had saved enough money from the sale of herbs and remedies to begin contemplating her own freedom. She had been permitted to keep a small portion of what she earned selling remedies to white families in the surrounding area, and over 5 years she had accumulated nearly $300. But she also understood that her true value to the community lay in her position at Beaumont Plantation, where she had access to information, influence, and the network she had built. Leaving would mean abandoning those people, the ones she protected, the ones who depended on her work. It was a choice between personal freedom and collective power, and for a long time Marie could not decide which path to take. The decision was taken out of her hands in the spring of 1845. Cyrus Holt, who had never fully abandoned his suspicions of Marie, finally uncovered evidence he believed he could use against her. One of Marie's intermediaries, a man named Benjamin, who carried messages between plantations, was caught with a letter containing detailed information about slave sales and plantation finances. Benjamin worked as a driver, transporting goods between plantations, which gave him legitimate reasons to travel and made him useful as a courier for the network. But in March of 1845, he was stopped on the road by a patrol searching for runaway slaves. The patrol searched his wagon and discovered the letter hidden among his belongings. The letter was written in the same coded language Marie used in her journal, employing plant names and gardening metaphors, but its meaning was clear enough to reveal knowledge of business dealings an enslaved man should not have possessed. Under interrogation, Benjamin admitted that he had gathered the information at Marie's direction. though he claimed not to understand why she wanted it or what she intended to do with it. Holt, who had waited years for proof, seized the opportunity. He brought the letter and Benjamin's testimony to Charles Beaumont, arguing that Marie was organizing an intelligence network among the enslaved population, collecting information that could be used for rebellion, escape, or sabotage. This time, Beaumont could not dismiss the accusation. The evidence was tangible, the implications severe. The letter proved Marie had access to plantation financial information and slave sale records with no legitimate justification. Benjamin's testimony confirmed she was directing the collection of that information. Marie was arrested and confined in plantation jail, while Beaumont deliberated her fate. The enslaved community was terrified. Marie had been their strategist, their quiet defender, their source of hope. Without her, they would be exposed to the full force of the plantation's authority. People who relied on her counsel, people whose families had been saved from separation, people she had trained in her methods, all feared what would come next. But Marie had prepared for this moment. Over the years, she had taught others how to observe, how to listen, how to gather information, how to plant influence carefully and indirectly. She had built a network that could function without her, even if it would never be as effective. And she still had one final move to make. From her cell in the plantation jail, Marie sent a message through the network she had created. The message was carried by Dinah, one of her most trusted students. It reached Thomas Beaumont in Vicksburg, where he was now established as a successful lawyer with growing political ambitions. The message contained information about a legal case Thomas was handling, a complicated property dispute that had been stalled for months. One of Thomas's clients was attempting to prove ownership of land that had been sold multiple times under questionable titles. The case hinged on documentation establishing a clear chain of ownership, documents that had been missing. Marie's network had discovered exactly where those documents were. They were in the possession of the opposing lawyer, deliberately concealed to prevent Thomas's client from prevailing. The message told Thomas precisely where the documents were located and how they could be obtained legally through a court order. It also included a proposal. If Thomas intervened on Marie's behalf, arguing that she was too valuable to punish harshly and should instead be sold to a more lenient owner in Louisiana, the detailed information would be provided. If he refused, the information would be destroyed and the case would remain stalled, likely resulting in a loss that could damage his professional reputation. It was blackmail, but of a particular kind, not a threat of harm, but an offer of value. Thomas would gain a significant legal victory in exchange for a relatively small concession. Thomas, ambitious and practical, recognized the opportunity immediately. He also recognized that Marie was far too intelligent and influential to remain in Mississippi, where she could continue to unsettle the planter class. Selling her to Louisiana, where laws were different and where she might eventually obtain freedom, would remove a threat while still benefiting his father financially. Thomas traveled to Beaumont Plantation and presented his argument. He insisted that Marie was too valuable to destroy through execution or sale to a brutal owner. That would be a waste of skilled property. Instead, he proposed selling her to a contact in New Orleans, a free black woman named Helen who operated a boarding house and required someone with Marie's skills. This would be profitable, eliminate the source of trouble, and avoid further complications. Charles Beaumont, weary of the problems Marie had caused and persuaded by the financial logic of the proposal, agreed. Marie was sold to Helen in New Orleans for $1,000, a price reflecting her intelligence and abilities. The sale was finalized in June of 1845. Marie was transported south to New Orleans, leaving behind the network she had built, the people she had protected, and the community that had come to rely on her. But she left something even more enduring behind, a method, a way of thinking, a system others could continue to use. The network persisted after her departure, weaker but still alive, still gathering information, still planting influence, still resisting in ways that left no evidence. Marie arrived in New Orleans in late June of 1845, and her life changed. Completely. The city was unlike anything she had known in Mississippi. Larger, more complex, and far more diverse, with a substantial population of free people of color who operated their own businesses, maintained their own communities, and exercised forms of influence that simply did not exist on plantations. Helen, the free black woman who had purchased Marie, was part of an organized network of free people of color dedicated to helping enslaved individuals obtain freedom through legal means. Marie's purchase had been carefully arranged to remove her from Mississippi and place her in an environment where she could realistically work toward buying her freedom. Helen operated a boarding house in the French Quarter, serving free people of color as well as white clients comfortable with New Orleans' more fluid racial boundaries. She needed someone with Marie's skills, a woman capable of managing the household, caring for sick boarders, overseeing supplies, and helping run a profitable business. From the beginning, the terms were clear. Marie would work for Helen and earn wages that would be applied toward purchasing her freedom. The price was set at $1,000, the amount Helen had paid, plus interest. It would take years, but it was possible. Marie threw herself into the work with the same disciplined efficiency she had always applied. She managed the boarding house, tended to ill guests, cultivated an herb garden in the courtyard, and began building new networks throughout the city. At the same time, she continued the work she had begun in Mississippi, now operated within a different and more complex social landscape. New Orleans contained a large population of enslaved people and free people of color, and with that came constant opportunities to help individuals navigate the narrow legal paths toward freedom. Marie connected with other free people of color working towards similar goals. She met lawyers who specialized in manumission cases. She met formerly enslaved people who had purchased their freedom and now help others do the same. She met activists who worked within the legal system to expand the rights of free people of color, and she began documenting everything she had learned. She started a new journal, more detailed and systematic than the one confiscated by Beaumont. In it, she recorded the methods she had refined over years: how to observe power structures, how to identify leverage points, how to gather information without attracting attention, how to plan information through trusted intermediaries, how to create change without leaving evidence. She documented specific cases, analyzing what had worked and what had failed, extracting principles that could be applied in other circumstances. She wrote about the psychology of power, how people in authority made decisions, what motivated them, what they feared, and how those fears could be used without direct confrontation. She wrote about networks, how to build them, sustain them, protect them, and use them to gather and distribute information. She wrote about trust, how to earn it, how to preserve it, how to identify who could be trusted with dangerous knowledge. She wrote about patience, about how meaningful change often required months or years, about maintaining resolve when progress seemed impossible. The journal became something more than a personal record. It was a manual of resistance, a textbook for using intelligence and information as weapons against oppression. Within 2 years, Marie had earned enough to purchase her freedom. In 1847, at the age of 31, she became a free woman. But freedom did not end her work. It expanded it. Using the remnants of the network she had built in Mississippi and the new connections she formed in New Orleans, Marie became a facilitator of freedom for others. She gathered information about enslaved people who might qualify for manumission, connected them with lawyers and free black sponsors, and helped them navigate the dense legal processes required to secure freedom. She also began sharing her journal, copying sections and distributing them through trusted channels. The text was passed from hand to hand, copied and recopied, its methods adapted and applied across the South. It became an underground textbook of resistance, teaching people how to use intelligence, patience, and information against a system designed to deny them power. The methods evolved as they spread, becoming part of the unseen toolkit enslaved people use to survive and resist. Marie Laveau spent the remainder of her life in New Orleans, working openly as a healer and herbalist, but quietly as an organizer and strategist for freedom. She never achieved public fame like some abolitionists. Her effectiveness depended on secrecy, and her influence required remaining unseen. Yet by the time she died in 1881 at the age of 65, she had helped facilitate the legal freedom of more than 200 people. She had trained dozens of others in her methods of strategic resistance. She had created networks of information and influence that continued to operate long after her death. The story of Marie Laveau, the enslaved woman from Mississippi, was deliberately obscured by history. The legend of a different Marie Laveau, the famed voodoo queen of New Orleans, a free woman of color who lived during the same era and openly practiced voodoo, became the dominant narrative. That legend overshadowed the far more dangerous story of the enslaved woman who used intelligence and information as tools of liberation. This obscuring was not accidental. Marie's true story threatened the narratives America preferred to tell about slavery. It revealed that enslaved people were not passive victims waiting for rescue, but active resistors using sophisticated methods to undermine the system that oppressed them. It showed that resistance did not always look like rebellion, and that patience and intelligence could be as powerful as violence. It also exposed uncomfortable truths about power itself. That power depended on information and perception, and that those who controlled information could influence outcomes even without formal authority. Schools did not teach this story because it complicated the simple narratives they favored: helpless slaves awaiting white saviors, or violent rebellion as the only form of resistance. Marie's life fit neither model. She was neither helpless nor violent. She was strategic, patient, and devastatingly effective. Her methods were documented in that journal, which survived only in fragments scattered across various archives. The pages were dispersed among different collections, often mislabeled or attributed to others. Some portions were dismissed as apocryphal, labeled folklore rather than legitimate historical evidence. But the methods described in those surviving pages, the systematic gathering of information, the careful planning of influence, the slow and patient construction of networks, were real, and they were used by countless people whose names were never written down. Marie Laveau's legacy was not rooted in supernatural powers or mystical rituals. It lay in demonstrating that knowledge, when carefully applied, could dismantle systems of oppression from the inside. That intelligence could be a weapon. That patience could function as strategy. That freedom could be built one deliberate intervention at a time. The Mississippi slave Marie Laveau understood something America has long resisted admitting: that the enslaved were not passive objects shaped by history, but active agents who shaped history themselves, through methods that were subtle, sophisticated, and far more dangerous to the established order than open rebellion ever was. That is why her story was denied a place in textbooks, not because it was untrue, but because it was too true. Because the truth it revealed challenged every comfortable assumption about power, resistance, and who was allowed to shape the course of history. A woman who tended herbs in a Mississippi plantation garden and altered the lives of hundreds through observation and carefully chosen words. That woman was more revolutionary than any army and more threatening to the system than any weapon. And that is precisely why her story was never taught. The real Marie Laveau, the one history chose to erase, proved that the most powerful form of resistance is often the one that leaves no visible trace. The kind that works within the system to dismantle it from the inside. The kind that uses the master's tools not for a dramatic destruction of the master's house, but to quietly unlock its doors and windows until the entire structure can no longer stand. Her story is a reminder that history is written by those who control the narrative, and that the most dangerous stories are often the ones deliberately erased. Because if people understood that intelligence and information could be weapons, that patience and strategy could achieve what violence could not, that systems of oppression could be undermined from within by those deemed powerless. If people truly understood that, then every system of oppression would be vulnerable in ways those in power could never fully defend against. That is a story they refused to teach in schools, not because it was false, but because it was true. And the truth, as always, is the most dangerous thing of